Vivid verses.
You want to know what's funny? Not funny haha, but funny in the way that makes you stare at a wall for 20 minutes. It's that I almost didn't apply. The position had been posted for 6 weeks before I even looked at it seriously. Sandra kept forwarding me the listing. My buddy Theo kept saying my name should already be on that short list. And I just kept finding reasons. The timing isn't right. The travel is a lot. Things at home are complicated. Things at home. That's the part one should back up on. Lauren and I had been together long enough that certain patterns were just built in, grooves worn into the floor. She had her way of doing things, and I had mine, and for a long time that felt like compatibility. But somewhere in the last couple of years, the grooves started feeling like trenches. She'd stopped asking about my work. Not in a checked-out way, more like a deliberate incuriosity, the kind you maintain so you don't have to acknowledge something. I noticed it the first time she changed the subject when I mentioned a project that had gone well. Told myself she was tired. Noticed it again when she didn't ask about a review I'd been anxious about for weeks. Told myself she had her own things going on. There was a dinner with her sister about 8 months before all this where she described what I did for a living and got it fundamentally wrong. Not simplified, wrong. And I remember sitting there thinking, when did she stop knowing? I smiled and corrected it gently, and nobody made anything of it. And I put that moment somewhere I could look at later. I should have looked sooner. By the time I finally submitted my application to Callaway Group, I had been quietly carrying the weight of a relationship that had stopped being reciprocal. I want to be precise about that word. Reciprocal. Not equal. I'm not interested in keeping score in that way. Reciprocal. Interested in each other. Wanting the other one to do well. I had spent the previous 2 months helping Lauren prep for a licensing renewal that had her stressed out. Drove her to the testing center on a Tuesday morning, waited in a parking lot for 2 hours, took her to lunch after. She passed. I was genuinely happy for her. She said thanks, and then she asked what time I needed to leave for a thing she'd apparently already checked out of. That was 8 months before she called my potential employer. The night I got the call from Callaway Group's HR director. His name was Raymond, and he had one of those voices that sounds like someone who's heard everything twice. I was in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building. Raymond told me I had the position. I remember exhaling against the headrest. Then he said, almost like he was checking a box he had to check, that during their process they'd received an anonymous inquiry. Vague. No specific allegations. Just, and I want you to hear this exactly the way he said it to me, concerns about your character and suitability for a role requiring travel and client trust. He said it calmly. He said they gave it the weight it deserved, meaning nearly none, and that it hadn't changed their decision. He paused. I didn't fill the silence. Character and suitability. Those are her words. That's how she talks when she's trying to sound official. We wanted you to know, Raymond said, because in our experience, if someone sends something like that, the candidate usually has an idea who it came from. I said, I appreciate you telling me. He said congratulations, and I thanked him, and we hung up. I sat in that parking garage for probably 12 minutes. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Lauren. I pulled up her name on my phone and looked at it and put the phone in my jacket pocket and drove home in total silence. Character and suitability. She was in the kitchen when I got home. She asked how my day was. I said it was fine. She told me there was pasta on the stove. I said thank you. We ate at the counter, both looking at our phones. Normal Tuesday night. She did not ask about the job. She knew the final round interview had been that afternoon. She had known for 10 days. She did not ask. She didn't ask because she thought she already knew the answer. I ate the pasta. I washed my bowl. I said I had some things to read before bed. That night, lying in the dark, I let the things settle into its full shape. She called them. She actually called them. And she made it anonymous, so I'd never know. But I know. Here's the part where I tell you I didn't do anything right away. Because I wasn't angry, or I was But anger wasn't the useful part of what I was feeling. The useful part was clarity. So I spent the next 2 days being very still and very quiet, and I reconstructed everything. And I want to walk you through it because I need you to understand this wasn't a suspicion. By the time I was done, it was architecture. First, the timeline. Raymond said the inquiry came in last Tuesday during a window between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. I had been in my final round interview. On site, 3 hours, no interruptions from 10 until 1. Lauren had worked from home that day. I knew this because she'd mentioned it Monday night. She had the whole morning to herself. Second, the language. Concerns about his character and suitability for a role requiring travel and client trust. I've known Lauren for years. She uses the word suitability the way other people use the word fit. It's a tick. She used it in an email to a contractor once. I saw it over her shoulder, and I remembered thinking, who says suitability? The word was sitting in that sentence like a fingerprint. Third, the shape of it. Anonymous. Vague. No specific allegation. That's not a disgruntled colleague. A colleague would have something specific, even if it were fabricated. An anonymous tip with no specific content is someone who doesn't have facts, only feelings, and wants to plant a seed without being traceable. That's personal. That's intimate. That's someone who knows the company would have to log it, but probably couldn't act on it. Fourth, she'd asked me twice in the previous month whether the Callaway role would really be worth it. Not in a supportive concern way, in a leading question way. The kind of question that already has a preferred answer baked in. I'd answered honestly both times. Yes, it would mean more travel, but it was the right move professionally, and I'd thought we'd worked through it. We hadn't worked through it. She'd archived her objection and gone another route. She didn't confront me. She flanked me, and she thought she was quiet enough that I'd never connected. Fifth, her behavior after Tuesday. She had been slightly, specifically easier, more pleasant, asking if I wanted anything when she got up, making coffee without being asked. The micro-kindness of someone who feels they've handled something. Sixth, and this one I sat with longest, she had done something similar, smaller, 2 years earlier. A colleague of mine named Dennis had been trying to pull me into a side project she didn't like. She mentioned to Dennis's wife at a birthday dinner that I had a lot going on personally right now. Vague, deniable, just enough to make Dennis hesitate. I'd filed that one away without fully naming it. I was naming it now. I've been reading the wrong book this whole time. I had all the pages. By the end of that second night, I wasn't in grief. I wasn't in rage. I was in the cold, clear country on the other side of both of those things. The decision wasn't a decision. It had already made itself. I just had to close it properly. Do this right. Do this once. The first thing I did, and yeah, I know how methodical this sounds, but I needed the sequence to be right, was call Raymond back. This was Thursday morning. I told him I was confirming my acceptance. He seemed pleased. I asked, with no drama in my voice at all, whether the inquiry had come in by phone or email. He paused for just a beat. He's deciding whether this is appropriate to share, and then said it had been a phone call, duration under 4 minutes, and that the number had come back to a prepaid line. Smart, I said. Most of them aren't, he said, and he had a dryness in his voice that told me he'd seen this before. I thanked him, confirmed my start date, and hung up. She used a prepaid line. She planned this far enough ahead to use a prepaid line. The second thing I did was stop discussing the job at home. Completely. Lauren asked once, that Thursday evening, if I'd heard anything. I said the process was still ongoing. She nodded. Something moved across her face. Relief, I think, dressed up as patience. I noted it and said nothing. The third thing. I started quietly organizing what was mine. Not dramatically, not in one theatrical sweep. Incrementally. Account information I'd meant to update. Subscriptions in my name I could redirect. A document I kept for the kind of things you don't want to have to reconstruct in a hurry. I updated it over the course of 4 evenings, sitting in my car in the driveway, 15 minutes at a time. Lauren didn't notice. People rarely notice the preparation they're not supposed to see. The fourth thing I did was speak to a friend of mine. You don't know him, I'll call him Theo, who had navigated something similar a couple of years back. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He said, "You know what you're doing." I said, "I need to be sure I'm doing it the right way." He said, "The right way is the way you can live with later." I've thought about that a lot since. The fifth thing, I confirmed the lease situation. Our apartment was jointly held, but my name was on it first. I'd signed before she moved in, she'd been added later. I called the management office and asked, very calmly, about the process for modification of an existing lease. The woman on the phone was helpful and unsuspecting and gave me everything I needed to know. Clean lines. I need clean lines. The sixth thing I did was small, but I want to mention it because it mattered to me. I went for a run this Saturday before the confrontation. 3 miles, which is more than I usually do. I was not trying to burn off anger. I was trying to make sure that when I sat down across from Lauren, I was fully inside my own body. Clear, uncluttered. I needed to say what I needed to say without anything extra in the room. That's the thing about being called out for your character. You want your character to be exactly in place when you respond to it. There was a moment in the sixth beat. I'm going to call it that because I can't think of another word for what happened at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoon, where she looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. I had asked her very simply what she'd done last Tuesday while I was interviewing. Not, "I know what you did." Not, "How could you?" Not anything like that. Just, "What were you doing last Tuesday morning while I was at my interview?" She said she'd been working, caught up on emails, maybe watched something during lunch. I said, "Do you remember what?" She said she didn't really. Something on her laptop. She's keeping it casual. She thinks casual is safe right now. I said, "Okay." And I'll let a beat of silence sit there. Then I said, "Callaway Group's HR director called me Tuesday afternoon." She nodded. Her face arranged itself into something that looked like neutral curiosity, but the arrangement took a half second too long. "He told me I got the job." Oh, a pause. That's great. She's already recalculating. She knows something's wrong. He also told me they received an anonymous call during the window when I was interviewing. Raised what he described as concerns about my character and suitability. And there it was. The word landing back in the room. Her face went a specific kind of still. Not shocked. That would have required it to be new information. "That's awful," she said. "Do you know who?" The call was 4 minutes. Came from a prepaid line. "Tuesday morning. You work from home." She's going to try one of two things. She's going to deny it, or she's going to reframe it as concern. She said, "I was worried about you. About us. I just thought if someone at the company knew there were." I said, "I'm going to stop you there." She stopped. "I know what you did. I'm not here to argue about it. I'm telling you that I got the job. I'm taking it. We're done." She stared at me. Her mouth opened, and she started to say something. I caught the beginning of it, something about talking this through, about how she'd been scared. And I said, "I heard you. That's all I have for this part of the conversation." "What does that mean?" she said. "I heard you. That's it. That's it." She set her mug down on the table. I remember the sound of it, harder than she intended. "You're not even going to—" "Lauren." I said her name once, quiet. "I've been clear." I stood up. I told her I'd be staying elsewhere for the next few weeks while we sorted logistics. I'd already arranged it. She looked at me like I was someone she'd just realized she had never fully seen, and I understood that feeling because I was having it too, just from the other direction. I picked up my jacket. I said goodnight. Character and suitability. She wanted someone else to question mine. She never looked at her own. I want you to understand that in the 48 hours after that conversation, 6 people contacted me. 6. Not all at once, drip-fed, The way interventions always are when one person is working the phones. The first was Lauren's friend Cassandra. I've always liked Cassandra, genuinely, which made it a little harder. She called Saturday morning, and she was warm and clearly rehearsed. She said she'd talked to Lauren and that Lauren was devastated and that she thought I was making a decision I hadn't thought all the way through. I let her finish. She went on for maybe 3 minutes. When she was done, I said, "Did Lauren tell you what she did the morning of my final interview?" Silence. She said you had a fight about the job. That's not the same thing. Call me when you know the whole story. I mean that sincerely. She said she would. She didn't call back. The second was Lauren's brother, Patrick. He left a voicemail. Mentioned that people handle fear in different ways. That Lauren loved me. That she'd made a mistake. I called him back that evening. Same question. Did she tell you what she did? He went quiet for a moment and then said, she said she made some calls. One call, I said, anonymous, to my future employer, about my character. Another pause. Longer. I didn't know it was anonymous, he said. Now you do. He's running the calculation. Give him time. I don't, he started. I don't know what to say about that. You don't have to say anything. I appreciate you calling. He thanked me for answering. There was something in his voice that had shifted by the end of the call. He wasn't coming back with a counter. The third was a woman named Bet, who was technically a mutual friend, but had always been more in Lauren's orbit. She was gentler than the others, and I think genuinely confused. She asked if I'd considered that Lauren might have been acting out of fear rather than malice. I said, I've considered it. Do you know what she specifically did? Bet didn't. Bet only knew there'd been a falling out over the new job. I told her in one sentence, just the fact of it. Bet said, oh, just that. A very specific, oh, that meant she was going to have a very different conversation with Lauren later that day. The fourth contact was a text from a guy named Rob, who I'd always found a little too eager to be in everyone's business. He sent me a paragraph about forgiveness and not throwing away something real. I read it twice. I sent back, did you know she made an anonymous call to my employer? He said he'd heard there were issues with the job change. I said that wasn't an answer. He didn't respond again. People defend what they're told to defend. Give them different information and they reorganize. That's not betrayal. That's just how it works. The fifth was her coworker Nadia, which surprised me. I'd met Nadia a handful of times. She was sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who called things what they were. She asked if we could talk. I said sure. She said she was calling because Lauren had asked her to, but she wanted to be straight with me. She said Lauren had told her the version where she was worried about my well-being, about how much stress the new role would add, about whether I was thinking clearly. And then Nadia said, and I want you to hear this exactly, but then she mentioned the call she made, and I asked her if she used her own name, and she said no, and I said, Lauren, that's a different kind of thing. There it is. I said, I appreciate you being honest with me, Nadia. She said, I told her I couldn't advocate for something I didn't fully understand. I'm sorry this happened. The scaffolding is coming down from the inside. Internal monologue, I registered it, filed it. Externally, I said thank you, asked her to take care of herself, ended the call. The sixth contact was Lauren herself. It came on a Monday evening, 9 days after I'd moved out. She called from her cell, and I answered because I needed to know which version of herself she was bringing to this call. She was angry, more than I'd expected. She said I was punishing her for caring about us. She said the Callaway job was always going to come between us, and I'd refuse to see it. She said I was turning everyone against her. She said us again. She's been using that word more now that there isn't one. I let her go. She went for almost 4 minutes, which is almost exactly as long as the call she made to Raymond's office. When she finished, I said, I got the job. I took it. I've been clear about where we are. I don't have anything new to add. She said, you're not even angry. I said, I'm not. She said, That's the most frightening thing you've ever said to me. Character and suitability. She wanted to decide both. She forgot I get a vote. I said goodnight. I ended the call. Within 2 weeks, and I know how fast that sounds, believe me, I clocked it too. Lauren did 5 things I would not have predicted a month earlier. The first, she called Raymond at Callaway Group from her own number and told him the anonymous inquiry had come from her. Identified herself, said she had no factual basis for any concern and that it had been made in a moment of poor judgment. Raymond told me this himself, briefly, on a Wednesday morning call where he was checking in on my onboarding. He said it without ceremony, just wanted you to know she reached out and retracted it formally. I said I appreciated the update. She did it voluntarily. Nobody told her to. The second, she returned a piece of furniture, a reading chair, that she'd bought with money she'd borrowed from me 14 months ago and never mentioned again. She had it delivered to Theo's apartment with a note that said it was mine. No message, just the chair and a typed note with my name on it. The third, she called Patrick and told him the full version. Not a softened version, the full version. I know this because Patrick called me afterward, briefly, just to say that he understood now and that he was sorry for the voicemail. He didn't ask me to do anything with that. He just needed me to have it. The fourth, she sent a message, 4 sentences, no preamble, that said she had been operating out of fear, that fear wasn't an excuse for what she'd done, that she knew she'd tried to take something from me that wasn't hers to take, and that she was sorry. I read it twice. I didn't respond that day. I didn't respond the day after. I saved it because I believe people should receive credit for saying hard, true things, but I also believe that saying them doesn't always require an answer. The fifth, she withdrew from the one shared thing we still had outstanding, a joint account that had about $300 of pool travel money in it. She withdrew her half, exactly her half, not a dollar more. That one I noticed most of all because it was the quietest. No performance, no conversation, just a clean split. That's the action of someone who stopped looking for a way back in. Theo, when I told him the timeline, said 2 weeks. You sure about that? I said, why does 2 weeks matter if it's real? He looked at me the way he does when he thinks I'm being deliberately dense. I was not. I genuinely meant it. Here's the thing about transformation that comes fast. People spend a lot of time questioning the speed because the speed makes them uncomfortable. It challenges the idea that change is always slow and suffering and incremental. But sometimes people already know. They know what they did. They know it was wrong. The speed of the reversal isn't evidence of insincerity. Sometimes it's evidence that the thing they were doing required maintenance. They're finally willing to stop providing. The lie was work. The truth, at some point, becomes the easier path. She took the easier path. 2 weeks later. I don't have lingering feelings about that in either direction. It is what it is. Lauren called me one more time, the Friday after the chair arrived. I almost didn't answer. I did. She said, I know you're not going to come back. I said no. She said, I just wanted to say, for whatever it's worth, that you were right. About all of it. I try to make it about fear, about us, about the travel. But what I actually did was try to make someone else question your character because I was afraid they'd see what I saw. There it is. Not the apology. The acknowledgement under the apology. I said, what did you see? She said, someone who was going to be fine without me. I sat with that for a second. I said, I appreciate you saying that. She said, the concerns weren't about your character. They never were. I needed someone else to believe they were. Character and suitability. It was never about either. I said, I know. She said, okay. I said, take care of yourself, Lauren. She said, yeah. I ended the call. Sat in my car for a minute. Not 12 minutes this time, just 1. Then I drove to my new place, which I'd been in for 11 days by then, and which still smelled like fresh paint, and which was entirely uncomplicatedly mine. Here's what I'd tell you if we were sitting somewhere and you asked me what I actually learned from all of it. The anonymous tip wasn't the betrayal. The anonymous part was the tell. People who believe they're right don't hide. She hid because some part of her already knew she was doing something she couldn't defend in daylight, and that knowledge didn't stop her, which means she went ahead anyway. You can call that fear. She did. But fear that doesn't stop itself at the line between concern and sabotage, that's not fear anymore. That's a choice dressed in fear's clothes. Character and suitability. She threw those words at a stranger in a 4-minute phone call hoping they'd do damage she couldn't do herself. They came back to her, eventually, not as punishment, just as the natural consequence of building something on a foundation you know is wrong. The structure tells on itself, eventually. I took the job. I'm 3 weeks in. The travel is a lot, and I like it. The rest sorted itself out.
Thanks for listening.